What happens when the man who promised to protect you becomes the architect of your destruction? For Clara Hayes, her fairy tale life shattered the moment the courtroom doors slammed shut. She was pregnant, innocent, and sentenced to prison for a crime she didn't commit. The accuser. Her billionaire husband, Damian Blackwood, convinced she had stolen a priceless heirloom. But the real thief was hiding in plain sight, a venomous mistress who framed her perfectly. This is the story of a devastating betrayal, a mother's fight for survival, and a husband's confession that came far, far too late. The penthouse apartment felt less like a home and more like a pristine museum exhibit floating above the New York City skyline. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine. Every piece of art was worth more than the average person's lifetime earnings, and every window offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the world below. This was Clara Hayes's life, now a life she had stepped into when she married Damian Blackwood, the technology billionaire whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless success. At 28, Clara, a talented architect with a spirit far gentler than the cutthroat world she now inhabited, often felt like another beautiful acquisition. She loved Damian, or at least she loved the man she saw in their quiet moments, the man who would trace the curve of her growing belly with a look of genuine wonder, whispering plans for their son. But that man was often eclipsed by the titan of industry, the Damian Blackwood who commanded boardrooms and whose time was measured in millions of dollars per minute. His most trusted lieutenant in all things was Isabella Ritchie. She was his executive assistant, but the title was a gross understatement. Isabella was Damian's shadow, his gatekeeper, his external hard drive. She was sleek, intelligent, and possessed an ambition that burned with the intensity of a blue flame. She had been with Damian for years, long before Clara, and she made no secret of her belief that she understood him in ways a wife never could. Clara's unease around Isabella was a constant low-grade hum. It was in the way Isabella would enter their private residence without knocking a file in hand, her eyes flicking over Clara with a dismissive coolness. It was in the inside jokes she shared with Damian, references to deals and trips that predated Clara's existence. Clara told herself it was her own insecurity, the lingering ghost of her middle-class upbringing, rattling around in this palace of glass and steel. The source of the impending storm, though she didn't know it yet, was locked away in Damian's private safe. It was a necklace known as the Star of Astoria, a staggering deep blue sapphire the size of a robin's egg, suspended in a web of antique platinum and diamonds. It had belonged to his mother, a woman Damian spoke of with a reverence that bordered on worship. One evening a few weeks before the annual Blackwood Foundation charity gala, which was to be held at their penthouse, Damian opened the safe. "I want you to wear it for the gala," he said, his voice soft as he lifted the heavy jewel from its velvet bed. Clara gasped. The necklace was cold and heavy in her palm, radiating a history and value that was terrifying. "Damian, I can't. It's a legend. What if something happens to it?" "Nothing will happen to it," he said, his confidence absolute. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. In the mirror, the sapphire seemed to swallow the light in the room. Its blue depths a stark contrast to her simple white dress and the warm glow of her pregnancy. "It belongs on you now. You are the lady of this house." Isabella, entering with a schedule update, paused at the doorway. Her eyes locked onto the necklace, and for a fleeting second, Clara saw something raw and unguarded in her gaze a flash of pure, unadulterated envy. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a tight, professional smile. "Stunning Clara Isabella," said her voice, smooth as silk. "A queen's jewel. You'll be the talk of the gala." The night of the gala was a dizzying blur of camera flashes, champagne flutes, and the hollow laughter of the city's elite. Clara, feeling large and clumsy in her bespoke maternity gown, wore the star of Astoria with a paralyzing sense of dread. She felt the weight of it, not just as a jewel, but as a symbol of Damien's trust. She took it off the moment they were alone, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it back to him. "It was beautiful, but I'm terrified of it," she confessed with a nervous laugh. Damien smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that made her heart ache. "You were the beautiful one." He placed the necklace back in its case, spun the dial on the safe, and patted the steel door. Safe and sound. 2 days later, the world ended. It began with a frantic search. A potential buyer a sheikh Damien had been courting for a new international venture was in town, and had expressed interest in seeing the famous sapphire. It was a power play, a display of legacy. Damien, wanting to close the deal, went to the safe. He came out moments later, his face pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Clara." "Where is it?" "Where is what?" she asked, looking up from the nursery blueprints she was reviewing. "Don't play games." "The necklace. The Star of Astoria. It's not in the safe." A cold fear, sharp and immediate, pierced through her. "What? That's impossible. You put it back. I saw you." They searched the study together, a frantic, useless exercise. It wasn't there. Damien's controlled panic was escalating into something uglier. That's when Isabella appeared, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "Damien? What's wrong?" she asked, rushing to his side. "The necklace is gone," he bit out, running a hand through his hair. "It's been stolen." Isabella's eyes widened. She put a comforting hand on his arm, a gesture of familiarity that grated on Clara's nerves. "Stolen, but how?" "The security here is—" She trailed off. Then her eyes shifted as if a sudden, terrible thought had occurred to her. "Oh, Damien." "No." "What is it?" he demanded. "It's probably nothing," Isabella said, hesitating for dramatic effect. "But the other day, I was looking for a swatch book in Clara's studio. I saw a box. I didn't think anything of it, but—" She didn't need to finish. The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Damien's gaze swung to Clara, his eyes hardening with a suspicion that was like a physical blow. "My studio." Clara was bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Without another word. Damien strode down the hall to the small, sunlit room Clara used for her architectural work. She followed her heart, hammering against her ribs. Isabella trailed behind them, a silent, watchful presence. Damien tore through the room, his usual precision gone replaced by a desperate fury. He ripped open closets' drawers, portfolio cases, and then tucked away in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet where she kept old sketches he found it. He pulled out a necklace. For a split second, relief washed over Clara until she saw it properly. It was a crude imitation. The sapphire was glass, the diamonds were chips of zirconia, and the platinum was cheap plated metal. It was a gaudy, worthless replica of the Star of Astoria. Damien held it up. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. "What is this, Clara?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I've never seen that before in my life," she stammered, her mind reeling. How did it get there? Who-would her eyes shot to Isabella. Isabella met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no mask. There was only triumph. You planned to replace it, Damien said, his voice flat with dawning horror and conviction. You took the real one and left this piece of trash, hoping I wouldn't notice for months, years even. No, Damien. Listen to me, Clara pleaded, taking a step toward him. I would never. Someone put that there. It was her. She pointed a shaking finger at Isabella. Isabella flinched back, a masterful performance of being wounded. Me? Clara, why would you say that? I'm just trying to help. She's always been jealous. She wants what we have. Clara's voice was rising, becoming hysterical, and she knew, even as the words tumbled out, that it was making her look guiltier. Damien's face was like stone. The love, the trust. The man who had looked at their unborn child with such wonder. It was all gone. In his place stood a judge, a jury, and an executioner, all convinced of her guilt. He saw his wife, the woman from a modest background, pregnant, and perhaps he now reasoned desperate to secure a future for herself in case things went wrong. He saw the worthless replica and the priceless original that was missing. He saw a betrayal of his mother's memory. I don't know who you are anymore, he said, his voice cracking with the agony of his own conclusion. He turned to Isabella. Call the police. The arrival of the New York Police Department detectives turned the surreal nightmare into a cold procedural reality. The penthouse, once a symbol of Clara's elevated life, became a crime scene. Men in somber suits spoke in low, serious tones, their presence a violation of the home's sterile perfection. Clara sat on a plush sofa, a cashmere throw clutched in her hands, feeling as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. Damien was a storm of controlled fury and wounded pride. He presented the narrative Isabella had so expertly crafted. He spoke of the necklace's immense sentimental value, his decision to let Clara wear it, and the shocking discovery of the replica in her personal studio. Every word was a nail in her coffin. Mr. Blackwood, did your wife have any financial troubles before you were married? One of the detectives, a man named Miller with weary eyes, asked. Before Damien could answer, Isabella interjected softly. Forgive me for speaking out of turn, detective, but I handle some of Damien's personal financial integrations. There were some significant student loans and a bit of credit card debt. Nothing unmanageable, of course, but... She let the sentence hang, pregnant with insinuation. Lies. Clara shot to her feet. My student loans were nearly paid off. I had no debt. Damien. Tell them. Damien wouldn't look at her. He simply gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the detective. There were some debts, he confirmed, his voice gravelly. I took care of them when we married. It was a truth twisted into a weapon. Yes, he had insisted on clearing her modest loans, a grand gesture of his wealth. But now, in this context, it painted her as a charity case, a woman with a history of needing money, a woman who might be tempted by a multi-million-dollar sapphire. The detectives questioned Clara. Her denials were passionate, her accusations against Isabella fervent. But to their trained, cynical ears, she sounded like every other cornered suspect. Her story was wild, a manipulative assistant framing the boss's wife out of jealousy. The alternative, a pregnant wife swapping a priceless heirloom for a fake, seemed simpler, more tangible. They had the replica found in her possession. They had a motive, however twisted. They had the word of Damien Blackwood. She was arrested. The quiet click of the handcuffs around her wrists was the loudest sound she had ever heard. They led her from her home past the priceless art and the panoramic views, her mind numb with disbelief. The final devastating blow was the look on Damien's face as she was escorted out. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, soul-deep disappointment. He truly believed she had done it. The media descended like vultures. The story was irresistible. Blackwood's bride, a burglar. Billionaire's pregnant wife, charged in jewel heist. Her face was plastered everywhere, a grainy, unflattering photo from a college event. The narrative was set. She was a gold digger who got too greedy. Her only lifeline was her best friend, Chloe, a fiercely loyal elementary school teacher who stormed into the precinct like a hurricane. "This is insane, Clara. We're going to fight this. We'll get the best lawyer in the city," Chloe vowed, her hands gripping the bars of the holding cell. But Damien Blackwood had already retained the best lawyers for the prosecution. He was determined to see justice served for the desecration of his mother's memory. He spared no expense building a formidable legal wall that Clara, with her limited resources, could never hope to breach. Her court-appointed lawyer was competent, but overworked, facing a team of legal assassins funded by a billionaire's righteous fury. The trial was a public crucifixion. On the stand, Damien was a figure of tragic nobility. He spoke of his love for his mother, the significance of the necklace, and the ultimate betrayal by the woman he had trusted with his heart and home. His testimony was devastating, his pain palpable to the jury. Isabella's performance was even more brilliant. She played the role of the reluctant witness, the loyal employee forced to reveal a painful truth. She recounted finding the replica with feigned tears, her voice breaking, as she described Damien's heartbreak. She painted a picture of Clara as being secretive, often complaining about being financially dependent, and expressing a casual envy of the Blackwood family's legacy. They were small, insidious lies, impossible to disprove, and powerful in their cumulative effect. When Clara took the stand, her own story sounded flimsy and desperate in comparison. Her voice shook with a mixture of terror and rage. She tried to explain Isabella's campaign of subtle sabotage, the looks, the comments, the constant undermining. But without proof, her words sounded like the paranoid ramblings of a guilty woman trying to deflect blame. Mrs. Blackwood, the prosecuting attorney, said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you asking this jury to believe that Mr. Ricci, a trusted employee of 10 years, orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy, risked her entire career, and planted a fake necklace in your closet, all because she was... what? A little jealous? Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking." Clara insisted, her eyes pleading with the impassive faces of the jury. The prosecutor just smiled sadly, as if pitying her delusion. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty. The judge's voice seemed to come from a great distance as he read the sentence. 5 to 7 years in the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for women. A strangled sob escaped Clara's throat. Her eyes flew to Damien. She searched his face for any flicker of doubt, any hint of the man she loved. She found nothing but a mask of cold, resolute duty. He had to believe this. To admit even the possibility of her innocence would be to admit his own monstrous failure, his gullibility, his catastrophic lack of judgment. It was easier to brand her a criminal than to face his own role in the tragedy. As the court officers led her away, she pressed a hand to her swollen belly. This was no longer just about her. They were sending her child to prison with her. She looked back one last time at the man who had been her husband, her partner, the father of her baby. He turned away, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. The love story was over. The real sentence was just beginning. The transition from a penthouse in the sky to a 6-by-9-foot concrete cell was a brutal, soul-crushing amputation of self. Bedford Hills Correctional Facility was a world of grey concrete, clanging steel doors, and the pervasive scent of industrial cleaner, failing to mask the underlying odour of despair. The first few weeks were a blur of humiliating procedures, ill-fitting uniforms, and the constant oppressive noise of the institution. Clara's pregnancy, once a source of joy and anticipation, became her greatest vulnerability and her only reason to survive. She was terrified. Every meal, every step, every interaction was filtered through the primal need to protect the life growing inside her. The other inmates regarded her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was the billionaire's wife, a fallen princess whose story had been tabloid fodder. To them, she was a tourist in their world of generational poverty and systemic failure. Her salvation came in the unlikely form of Maria, a woman in her late 40s, serving a long sentence for armed robbery. Maria was tough with eyes that had seen everything, and a network of alliances that made her a quiet power on the cell block. She saw the raw terror in Clara's eyes, the hand that instinctively cradled her belly, and took her under her wing. "Stop looking so scared," Maria told her one day in the mess hall, her voice a low rasp. "Fear is blood in the water here. You're a mother now. Act like it." Maria taught her the unwritten rules, which guards to avoid how to trade. For who? For better food. How to make herself invisible. She taught Clara that survival in prison wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the smartest and seeing the angles no one else did. For the first time since her arrest, Clara felt a flicker of agency. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Damien Blackwood was trying to erase her. He had Isabella orchestrate a quiet, swift divorce. He poured himself into his work with a renewed ferocity, launching new products and closing billion-dollar deals. He and Isabella were now a public power couple, her presence at his side, a constant fixture in financial news. She had moved into the penthouse, her clothes now filling the closet that had once been Clara's. She had everything she had ever wanted. But the victory felt strangely hollow to Damien. The penthouse was colder, the silence heavier. At night, he'd find himself walking past the sealed nursery, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Isabella would gently guide him away, her touch smooth and reassuring. "Don't torture yourself, darling," she'd murmur. "She wasn't the person you thought she was." He clung to those words like a mantra, a shield against the creeping tendrils of doubt. 7 months into her sentence, Clara went into labor. The experience was a primitive agony, a world away from the sanitized birthing suite she and Damien had planned. The prison infirmary was stark and cold, the staff indifferent. Maria stood guard outside the door, ensuring no one bothered her. Through the haze of pain, Clara focused on one thing, her son. Leo Hayes was born small but healthy, his first cries echoing in the sterile room. Holding him for the first time, Clara felt a love so fierce it eclipsed all the pain, all the injustice. His tiny fingers curled around hers. And in that moment, he was the only thing in the world that was real and true. The cruelty of her situation became starkly clear. She was allowed to keep him with her in the prison's nursery unit for only a short time. Every day was a precious, stolen gift. She memorized the shape of his ears, the scent of his skin, the way his eyes, so much like Damien's, blinked slowly in the dim light. The day she had to hand him over to Chloe was the day her heart truly broke. Chloe stood on the other side of a sterile visitation room divider, her face a mask of grief. "I'll take care of him, Clara. I swear it," Chloe sobbed, reaching for the baby. "I'll bring him to visit every week. He will know who his mother is." Giving Leo to her friend felt like tearing off a limb. As she watched them walk away, a part of Clara died. The fight went out of her, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. She was just a number now, a ghost haunting a concrete box. Chloe was true to her word. She created a private social media page, accessible only to a few trusted family members, where she posted photos and updates about Leo. It was a way for Clara to watch her son grow from afar, through smuggled printouts that Maria would get for her. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, Damien found himself sleeplessly scrolling through a business contact's feed. A shared post caught his eye. It was from Chloe. He remembered her as Clara's fiery, loyal friend. The post was public, a rare slip-up on Chloe's part. It was a picture of a baby boy sitting in a high chair, a smear of sweet potato on his cheek. His eyes, those eyes laughing at the camera. The caption read, "My beautiful godson Leo, 1-year-old today. Your mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky, and she will be home soon." Damien froze. He zoomed in on the photo. The boy had his jawline, his dark hair, and the exact same shape of his eyes. This was his son, a son he had abandoned. A son who was growing up without a father whose mother was in prison because of him. He saw the comments below the post. One read, "He looks just like his mother, so strong." Another, "That Blackwood monster doesn't deserve to even know this angel exists." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Monster. For the first time, the carefully constructed walls of his certainty began to crumble. He looked at the laughing baby in the photo and felt not the satisfaction of justice served, but a cold, creeping dread. The dread that he had been catastrophically wrong. The image of Leo laughing in his high chair became seared into Damien's mind. It haunted his days and invaded his dreams. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the boy's eyes staring back at him. The word monster echoed in the silence of the penthouse. His impenetrable certainty had been the foundation of his actions. He had known Clara was guilty. He'd seen the evidence, heard the testimony, but the photo of his son chipped away at that foundation until hairline fractures of doubt spread through everything. What if he had been wrong? The magnitude of that possibility was so immense, so terrifying that he could barely breathe. He began his own quiet, obsessive investigation operating in the shadows of his own life. He couldn't alert Isabella. His suspicion was still just a phantom, and he knew she was too smart, too embedded in his life to risk tipping her off. He had to unravel the story himself, thread by painful thread. His first step was to revisit the narrative that had convicted Clara, her supposed financial desperation. He had blindly accepted Isabella's summary of Clara's significant debts. Now he bypassed his own company's accountants and hired an outside forensic accounting firm, giving them a simple directive. Find everything you can about Clara Hayes's finances for the 5 years prior to our marriage. While he waited for their report, he turned his attention to the penthouse security systems. He better than anyone knew their capabilities. He spent hours reviewing footage from the days surrounding the theft. On the surface, nothing was amiss. But Damien wasn't looking at the surface. He was looking for what wasn't there. He analyzed entry logs, motion sensor activity, and network access points. He found it late one night in the server room, a 5-minute data gap in the security log for the hallway leading to Clara's studio. It occurred at 2:17 a.m., 3 days before the necklace was reported missing. To any normal security review, it would look like a minor system glitch, a momentary reboot. But Damien knew his own system. It didn't glitch. A gap like that had to be manually created by someone with the highest level admin privileges. Only 2 people had that access, him and Isabella. A cold sweat broke out on his skin. He remembered being on a conference call with Tokyo that night. He had been in his office for hours. The report from the forensic accountants arrived the next day. It was a thin folder. The summary was stark. Clara Hayes had been the model of financial responsibility. She had 2 outstanding student loans, which she was paying down ahead of schedule through disciplined automated payments. Her credit card had a 0 balance. She had a modest but growing savings account. There was no desperation. There was no significant debt. There was only a woman carefully building a life for herself. Isabella's claims at the trial had been a complete fabrication, a lie, a deliberate, calculated lie. Damien felt the floor drop out from under him. He had built his empire on data, on facts, on seeing through deception, and he had been played for a fool by the person he trusted most. The image of Clara on the witness stand, her face streaked with tears, her voice raw as she pleaded with him to believe her, flashed in his mind. He had turned away. His focus narrowed to the replica necklace. In the storm of the investigation and trial, no one had bothered to trace its origin. It had simply been Exhibit A, the proof of Clara's deceit. Now it was the key. Using a proxy, he had the evidence file from the NYPD discreetly pulled for re-evaluation. He hired a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Ari, whose specialty was tracing the untraceable. As Damien delved deeper, Isabella sensed the shift. He was distant, preoccupied. The easy intimacy they had cultivated since Clara's imprisonment had evaporated, replaced by a polite, formal chill. "Is everything all right, Damien?" she asked one evening, placing a hand on his shoulder as he stared out at the city lights. "You seem so far away." He forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind, with the new merger. Long days." She accepted the lie, but her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were watchful. She began to subtly reassert her control, anticipating his needs, managing his schedule with even more ruthless efficiency, leaving him no room to breathe, no room to think. She was reminding him of how indispensable she was. But it was too late. He was already pulling at the thread. Ari the investigator called a week later. "The replica is high-quality theatrical work," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Not something you buy off the street. The materials are specific. I tracked the zirconia chips to a supplier who sells exclusively to a handful of artisans in the tri-state area. One of them is a man named Antoine Dubois, operating out of a small studio in Brooklyn. Specializes in period pieces for film and private commissions. He's a cash-only artist. No paper trail. Get me a meeting," Damien ordered, his heart pounding. 2 days later, Damien was sitting in a cluttered, dusty workshop that smelled of metal and polish. Antoine Dubois was a small, nervous man with ink-stained fingers. He was terrified of Damien Blackwood, but Ari's methods had been very persuasive. "I don't want trouble," Antoine stammered. "You won't have any provided you tell me the truth." Damien said, his voice calm and cold. "A little over a year and a half ago, you made a replica of this necklace." He slid a high-resolution photo of the Star of Astoria across the table. Antoine paled, nodding slowly. "Yes. I remember. A very specific job. The client was particular. Describe her." "I never saw her face clearly. She wore a large hat, sunglasses. Always. Paid in cash. But..." He paused, trying to recall the details. "She smelled of something. A perfume. Very distinctive. Tuberose, I think. And she wore a ring on her right index finger. A silver snake eating its own tail." Damien's blood ran cold. The Ouroboros ring. Isabella had worn it every day for the past decade. It was a gift from her first mentor. She never took it off. He had her. The thread had been unraveled. Now all that was left to do was to watch the entire tapestry of lies come undone. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur. The confirmation of Isabella's guilt didn't bring Damien relief, only a sickening, hollow certainty. He wasn't just a fool, he was an accessory. His arrogance and his wounded pride had been the weapons Isabella used to destroy Clara. He had handed them to her willingly. He spent the next 48 hours constructing a trap. He moved with the cold, predatory precision he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He had Ari install discreet, high-fidelity audio and video recorders in his study, the same room where Clara's life had been dismantled. He instructed his legal team to prepare 2 sets of documents. One a severance package for Isabella, of unprecedented generosity, and the other a comprehensive file detailing the evidence against her to be delivered to the district attorney's office. The final piece of his plan was the bait. He called Isabella into the study on a Friday evening. "Close the door," he said, his tone casual. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." She entered, smiling, the ever-efficient partner, ready to solve a problem. She was wearing the Ouroboros ring. The faint floral scent of tuberose perfume trailed behind her. "I've received an extraordinary offer for another one of my mother's pieces." He began gesturing to a velvet box on his desk. "This emerald suite. The offer is almost too good to be true. Before I proceed, I need to have it independently verified and a replica made for the insurance records. The process is a bit unorthodox. It requires absolute discretion." He watched her face. For a fraction of a second, her professional mask slipped. A flicker of avarice of calculation crossed her features before being smoothed away. "Of course," she said. "I can handle that for you. I know just the person. Discreet works off book." "Excellent," Damien said, leaning back in his chair. "Cash only, I assume." "Like Antoine Dubois." The name hit her like a physical shock. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. I don't know who that is." "Don't you?" Damien's voice dropped, losing all its warmth. "He's an artisan in Brooklyn. He remembers you. He remembers the hat, the sunglasses. He remembers the smell of tuberose." Damien leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers, "and he remembers the ring." Isabella instinctively tucked her right hand behind her back. "This is ridiculous." "Damien, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a 5-minute data gap in my security logs. I'm talking about a forensic accounting report that shows Clara had no debt. I'm talking about perjury, Isabella. I'm talking about fabricating evidence. I'm talking about you sending an innocent pregnant woman to prison." She stared at him, her mind racing, searching for an escape route. She tried tears first. "Damien, how can you even think this? After everything I've done for you, for this company." She twisted your mind against me. She was always jealous of our relationship. "Stop," he commanded, his voice like cracking ice. "The performance is over. The cameras are rolling." He gestured to a nearly invisible lens in a bookshelf. Her tears vanished, replaced by a cold fury. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered, revealing the years of bitterness and resentment beneath. "You want a confession?" She hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Fine. Yes, I did it. Every last bit of it." She stood up, pacing the room like a chained animal, her confession pouring out in a torrent of rage. "I gave you 10 years of my life. I was there for every deal, every crisis, every all-nighter. I built this empire with you. I was your partner in everything but name. And what was my reward? To stand by and watch you give it all away to some doe-eyed little architect who didn't have a clue what it meant to be a Blackwood." Her voice dripped with contempt. She was weak. She didn't deserve you. She didn't deserve this life. I deserved it. I earned it. "The necklace," Damien asked, his voice hollow. "Pathetically easy," she scoffed. "I had the replica made weeks in advance, swapped them out the night of the gala when you were both distracted. I knew your security protocols better than your own guards. Planting it in her studio was child's play. And you were so blinded by your precious mother's memory and your own arrogance you believed every word. You wanted to believe it. It was easier than admitting you'd married beneath you." The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She had seen his weakness, his pride, and used it as a lever to orchestrate the entire tragedy. "Where is the real one?" he demanded. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It's my severance package, my retirement plan, hidden away where you'll never find it." Damien didn't move. He just stared at the woman he thought he knew, a stranger filled with a poison he had never seen. "You won't need a retirement plan where you're going, Isabella." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Frank, please come in, and bring the gentleman with you." The study door opened. 2 NYPD detectives, the same Detective Miller from the initial investigation, and his partner stepped inside. Miller's face was grim. He had read the file Damien's lawyers had prepared. Isabella's face went white with genuine shock. She looked from the detectives to Damien, a final desperate plea in her eyes. Damien met her gaze, his own expression devoid of any emotion, but a vast, empty regret. "It's over." As they read Isabella her rights and cuffed her, the full crushing weight of his failure descended upon him. This confession wasn't a victory. It was a testament to his own monumental blindness. He hadn't just been wrong. He had been a monster. And his confession, the one that truly mattered, was still to come. And it would be far, far too late. The arrest of Isabella Ricci ignited a media firestorm that dwarfed the original scandal. The headlines were brutal Blackwood's empire of lies. Mistress admits to framing pregnant wife. In the new narrative, Damien was no longer the tragic wronged husband. He was recast as a gullible fool, at best a cruel accomplice at worst. Blackwood Industries' stock price plummeted as the market reacted to the instability and moral rot at the company's core. For Damien, the public humiliation was nothing compared to the private agony. He was haunted by the knowledge that every clang of a prison door, every lonely night Clara had spent in a cell, every terrified moment of her prison birth was his fault. He had not only allowed it to happen, he had powered it with his wealth and his rage. His lawyers, a new team specializing in wrongful convictions, moved swiftly. With Isabella's full confession, the evidence of her conspiracy, and Damien's own sworn affidavit admitting his catastrophic error, the legal path to exonerating Clara was clear, though fraught with bureaucratic inertia. In Bedford Hills, the news arrived on a smuggled copy of the New York Post that Maria slid under Clara's cell door. Clara stared at the headline, at the picture of Isabella in handcuffs, her face a mask of defiant fury. She felt nothing. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a profound hollow exhaustion, as if she had been holding her breath for 2 years and could finally let it go. Freedom was coming. But what did freedom even mean anymore? It couldn't give her back her son's first words, his first steps. It couldn't erase the memory of giving birth on a cold infirmary table or the phantom weight of handcuffs on her wrists. The truth had come out, but it was a truth scarred and damaged, arriving long after the lie had done its work. Damien, desperate and broken, attempted to visit her. He needed to see her, to apologize, to beg for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. The request came back, stamped with a single damning word: refused. Days later, the final orders came through. Clara Hayes was officially exonerated of all charges. Her conviction was vacated. She was a free woman. The release process was quiet and surreal. She walked through the same gates she had entered 2 years prior, trading her grey prison uniform for simple clothes Chloe had brought her. The world seemed too loud, too bright, too fast. As she stepped into the sunlight, she saw a media circus held back by barricades. And she saw him. Damien was standing by a black town car, looking gaunt and older. His eyes, desperate and pleading, found hers across the pavement. He took a hesitant step toward her, but Chloe moved between them, a fierce and protective barrier. "Not today, Damien," Chloe said, her voice trembling with rage. "Not ever, if I have my way." Clara didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on Chloe's car, on the child seat in the back. She got in without a word, and Chloe drove away, leaving Damien standing alone on the pavement, a ghost at a reunion he was not invited to. Their first stop was Chloe's small, warm apartment in Queens. The moment Clara walked through the door, a small boy with dark, curly hair and familiar eyes toddled toward them, looking at her with a stranger's curiosity. "Leo, Chloe," whispered her voice, thick with tears. "Mama's home." Clara sank to her knees, her arms outstretched. Leo hesitated, glancing back at Chloe, his anchor for reassurance. Clara's heart broke and swelled at the same time. She was a stranger to her own son. She didn't rush him. She just waited, her face wet with silent tears. Finally, driven by a toddler's curiosity, Leo took a few wobbly steps forward and placed a tiny hand on her cheek. "Mama," he whispered, testing the word. "Yes, baby," Clara sobbed, pulling him into a gentle embrace, breathing in the sweet scent of her child for the first time as a free woman. "Mama's here." She held him, rocking back and forth on the floor of her friend's apartment, the gaping wounds of the last 2 years beginning finally to feel the first touch of healing. She was free. She had her son. But the reckoning was yet to come. Life after prison was a fragile, disorienting piece. Clara and Leo moved into a quiet brownstone in Brooklyn, paid for by a victims' compensation fund the state had awarded her. Every day was a process of rediscovery. She learned the rhythm of her son's life, his favorite books, his hatred of peas, the way he giggled when she tickled him. She was rebuilding her life from the ashes, but the ghosts of her past were never far. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, the metallic clang of a cell door echoing in her ears. Damien, true to his word, began his campaign of atonement. It started with a formal offer delivered by his lawyers, a settlement of $50 million, the penthouse, any property she desired, and a public apology he would read from the steps of his company headquarters. Clara's response was swift. She sent back the legal documents with a single sentence written across the front in red ink. "My life is not for sale." She knew, however, that she couldn't cut him out completely. He was Leo's father. For the sake of her son, she finally agreed to meet him. Not in a lawyer's office or a fancy restaurant, but on neutral ground, a quiet bench in Prospect Park. He arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a shell of a man consumed by a guilt that was etched into every line on his face. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm not here for you, Damien." She cut him off, her voice steady and devoid of the fire he'd expected. It was colder and far more devastating. "I'm here for my son. He will one day ask about his father, and I need to be able to tell him that I gave his father a chance to explain why he sent his mother to prison." The words, delivered so calmly, struck him harder than any slap. "There is no explanation," he whispered, his eyes on the ground. "Only a confession. I was arrogant. I was proud. When I thought you betrayed me, betrayed my mother's memory, my grief and my ego made me blind. Isabella showed me what I wanted to see, and I was too much of a coward to look any deeper. I failed you. In every way, a man can fail a woman. I am so sorry." She listened, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't give me back the 2 years I lost. It doesn't give Leo back his mother for the first year of his life." "You talk about your mother's memory, Damien. What about the memory you created for your own son?" "His first memories of his mother are in a prison visitation room. That's your legacy." Tears streamed down his face, hot and shameful. "I know. God, I know. What can I do? Tell me what to do." "You want to atone?" she asked, finally looking at him. "Then be a father. That's all. You can see Leo on Saturdays. You will pay for his education. You will never, ever speak ill of me to him. You will answer his questions honestly when he is old enough to ask them. You will live with what you've done every single day, just like I have to. That is your penance." He nodded, accepting her terms as if they were a lifeline. And us, he asked the question, a faint, hopeful whisper. Clara gave a sad, weary shake of her head. "There is no us. You can't rebuild a home after you've burned it to the ground. I loved you, Damien, but the man I loved wouldn't have let this happen. Isabella was just a snake. But you opened the door and let her in. You held me down while she bit." She stood up, her time with him concluded. "Goodbye, Damien." She walked away, leaving him alone on the park bench, a billionaire with all the money in the world and nothing left to buy. The final scene of the story isn't one of revenge, but of quiet resilience. Months later, Clara stands in a small, bright office, a blueprint for a community library, spread out on her desk. She has started her own small architectural firm, focusing on public projects. Leo plays with blocks on the floor nearby. Her life is not gilded anymore. It is real, built with her own 2 hands. She is a survivor, her strength forged in fire. Damien fulfills his role, a weekend father, living in a silent penthouse haunted by ghosts. Isabella received a lengthy prison sentence, and the star of Astoria, recovered from a Swiss vault, now sits in the darkness of a museum archive, a tainted symbol of a love and a trust that were shattered beyond repair. Clara Hayes had lost a fortune, but in the end, she had reclaimed something far more valuable herself. Clara's story is a harrowing reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we love the most. She lost everything, but she never lost herself. Her fight for the truth and her journey to reclaim her life and her son is a testament to the strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. They say money can buy anything except anonymity from the internet. One crisp summer morning, billionaire industrialist David Harrington thought he'd scored the perfect getaway with a bewitching companion half his age. Sunlit waves shimmered behind them in an Instagram post he never dreamed would shatter his life. Within hours, a fiery storm of comments erupted, accusing the mysterious woman of being someone far more dangerous than she appeared. The rumors spiraled into a full-blown exposé that threatened not just David's crumbling marriage, but also his image and legacy. In a single click, the world learned that secrets, no matter how well funded, rarely remain buried. David Harrington had always been a man who commanded attention the instant he walked into a room. At 6 feet 2 inches, with tailored suits that seemed to drape his athletic frame flawlessly, he radiated a polished self-assurance cultivated over decades of hard work and strategic gambles. Born in Chicago to a middle-class family, David displayed an early flair for numbers and negotiation. By the time he was in college, he'd already built 2 small businesses, one reselling refurbished laptops out of his dorm, and another importing artisanal leather wallets from Italy. He was a hustler in the best sense of the word, unrelenting in his pursuit of prosperity. When he turned 25, David took his biggest risk yet. He convinced an angel investor named Richard Carmichael, a man revered for his savvy in emerging markets, to pour $500,000 into a software automation startup David co-founded. It was an audacious move, especially in a market saturated with bigger, more established players. But David's persuasion worked. Within 18 months, the startup was acquired by a larger tech conglomerate, netting David his first major fortune. It was the start of an illustrious career that would see him founding or funding a series of successful ventures into technology, real estate, and even renewable energy. By his mid-30s, David Harrington was wealthy beyond imagination, yet his ambition burned brighter. He was rarely satisfied. Gone were the days of renting modest apartments and living on fast food. He now presided over a sprawling empire, complete with offices in New York, London, Singapore, and Sao Paulo. He jetted around the globe for business deals, indulging in the high life trappings, private yachts, membership at exclusive clubs, and a mansion perched atop the Hollywood Hills with a ski-line view that glittered like diamonds at night. But hidden beneath the aura of success was a restless void. He was married, yes, to the beautiful and accomplished Sarah Whitmore. They met at a charity event in Los Angeles, bonding over a shared passion for philanthropy. Sarah, an Ivy League-educated lawyer turned environmental activist, had grown up in a similarly middle-class background. She understood David's drive and matched him in intellect, For a while they seemed the ultimate power couple, publicly philanthropic, privately fierce in their love and ambitions. However, time and relentless pursuit of more money placed stress cracks in their marriage. David's constant travel, late-night negotiations, and if rumors were to be believed, unstoppable appetite for new experiences, all weighed heavily on Sarah. As David's orbit expanded, she found herself increasingly sidelined, overshadowed by the gravitational pull of his ambitions. Even the philanthropic causes they once championed together were neglected. David wrote the checks, but rarely bothered to attend the galas or volunteer events anymore. By the time he was in his early 40s, the heart of their relationship had eroded, replaced by polite tolerance and carefully orchestrated public appearances. That was the environment in which David would eventually make a series of decisions, culminating in the scandal that would rock his world. Fueled by ego and weary of the stale comfort his marriage had devolved into, he sought excitement elsewhere. He believed he was untouchable, convinced his well-oiled team of advisors and the iron curtain of wealth could conceal any indiscretions. But David Harrington was about to learn one of life's harshest truths in the digital era. Every secret has a lifespan. All it takes is a single post for an empire's pristine facade to come crashing down. Sarah Whitmore Harrington was no stranger to adversity. Raised by a single mother in a modest Chicago neighborhood, she thrived academically, eventually securing a full scholarship to Columbia University. While her classmates carried designer purses and took spring breaks in Europe, Sarah juggled part-time jobs at coffee shops and university libraries. She took pride in her self-reliance, never shying away from hard work and rigorous study. By her mid-20s, Sarah was practicing corporate law at a prestigious Manhattan firm. She was brilliant, resilient, and notably empathetic. Those qualities caught the attention of an internal pro bono committee, which led her to champion several environmental cases against big corporations. Her compassion for the underdog and her deep sense of justice made her a formidable foe in legal negotiations. She even won a high-profile lawsuit that forced a major chemical company to pay millions in damages to a marginalized community. The victory made headlines, and from that moment, Sarah became recognized not just as a skilled lawyer, but as a warrior for ethical responsibility. That was how she met David at a black-tie fundraiser in Los Angeles, where he presented a sizable check to the environmental organization she represented. The sparks flew instantly. In him, she saw a titan with an innate gift for making money, and an equally fervent philanthropic side, an individual who could potentially reshape industries for the better. In her, he saw a steadfast spirit, beautiful both inside and out, and a partner whose intellect could match his. Their courtship was whirlwind. They dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, attended exclusive events, and traveled abroad to meet potential charity partners in places like Nairobi and Mumbai. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish beach ceremony in Maui, complete with dignitaries, celebrities, and the who's who of venture capital in attendance. However, the transition from newlyweds to a stable marriage was rocky. David's businesses, spread across multiple sectors, demanded constant attention and travel. Meanwhile, Sarah transitioned from corporate law to running her own not-for-profit legal consultancy for environmental issues, an endeavor that required significant energy and focus. They saw each other less and less. The times they did manage to reconnect were overshadowed by David's phone calls, emails, and text notifications. Despite the cracks in their relationship, Sarah believed she still knew David better than anyone else. She sensed when he was exhausted, recognized when his bravado was merely a cover for deeper anxieties. She also recognized as his success soared to new heights that he was falling into certain patterns, seeking novelty, losing interest in things that once mattered, constantly pushing boundaries. But she never quite dared to voice her growing suspicions. She wanted to preserve their public image, and more critically, she didn't want to face the reality that her husband might be cheating. Then the subtle shifts started. David became secretive about his phone, quickly changing screens when she walked by. He started going on business trips to places that made no sense, or at times that were uncharacteristic for the industries he worked in. Once Sarah found a diamond bracelet in his study desk, one that was clearly not for her, as she had never once expressed interest in that style, nor had he gifted her something similar in years. She brushed it off, attributing it to a possible gift for a female investor or sponsor. But deep down, she suspected. Sarah thought about confronting him multiple times, yet her pride held her back. In her mind, relationships were built on honesty and trust, but confronting David without proof felt like a betrayal of her self-respect. She wanted certainty. She needed to be sure. In the quiet corners of her soul, she wondered if it might be easier to look away, to focus on her philanthropic work, and to let David chase his illusions. After all, they maintained a semblance of stability. They weren't short on money. Her beloved mother was comfortable living in a gorgeous townhouse that Sarah and David financed. On the surface, her life seemed perfect. But as the months rolled on, Sarah felt a gathering storm, an anxiety that gnawed at her. Something in her marriage and David was shifting. For all her accomplishments, for all her unwavering character, she was powerless to stop whatever was happening. A sense of impending disaster loomed. She could almost hear the faint thunderclap on the horizon. She just didn't know how or when it would strike, only that it was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. David Harrington first laid eyes on Layla St. James at a private art exhibit in Soho. The event was one of those exclusive gatherings of the ultra-wealthy and avant-garde, a place to see and be seen. She stood in front of a painting, a swirl of neon colors, something abstract and disorienting, and seemed lost in thought. She wore a simple yet elegant emerald green dress, her tawny hair falling in loose waves down her back. David was immediately intrigued by her aura of quiet confidence. He approached her fully expecting that easy spark he often found in conversations. Layla, however, surprised him. She greeted him with polite warmth, but spoke with a self-assuredness and intellectual depth that caught him off guard. She was not overly impressed by his status or money. At least she didn't show it in the usual fawning way. Instead, she asked him questions about his philanthropic endeavors, referencing a literacy program in Southeast Asia that David's foundation had once funded. Few people outside his close circle even knew about that. It was an obscure project, overshadowed by his more flashy contributions. Fascinated by her knowledge, he pressed further. Layla revealed she was an art historian by training, had worked in Europe's auction circuit, and recently moved to New York to pursue her own gallery aspirations. She claimed she had grown tired of the pretentiousness in traditional art circles and wanted to start a space that embraced both established and emerging artists. Over a cocktail in the exhibit's VIP lounge, Layla recounted travel stories from her time in Paris, how she'd negotiated million-dollar deals for rare impressionist works. Her voice dripped with a delicate, almost musical accent. David couldn't quite place a mix, she said, from traveling around the world. In the weeks that followed, they exchanged numbers. David found himself texting Layla at odd hours, discussing art-world politics and eventually drifting into flirtation. Layla reciprocated, sprinkling their conversations with subtle compliments and innuendo, that kept David on his toes. It felt like a dance one that David had not experienced in a long time. Sarah had once been his intellectual equal, but now their discussions were overshadowed by property deals, lawsuits, and superficial gatherings. Layla offered something new, something fresh. Their first real date came under the guise of a business meeting at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Midtown. David told himself he was merely exploring philanthropic collaboration, maybe funding an art initiative Layla had proposed. But by dessert, they were lost in each other's eyes. A wave of guilt threatened to crash over David, but he quelled it with a glass of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, rationalizing that he deserved happiness. Life was too short, and he had worked too hard. If he couldn't indulge once in a while, what was the point of all this success? Days turned into weeks, and he found every excuse to see Layla. A hotel suite at the Pierre, a weekend in the Hamptons. David claimed he had an urgent real estate matter to attend to. Layla was always there, radiant, engaging, confident in her allure. But there was something else about her, a certain mystery that David couldn't pinpoint. She rarely spoke about her family or past relationships. She was cagey whenever he asked about the specifics of her work in Europe. His curiosity was piqued, but the thrill of their clandestine encounters overshadowed any red flags. In private moments, Layla would talk about the future, teasing a world where they might be more public in their romance. David smiled, uncertain if he could ever cross that line. He was still tethered by a marriage that he had not fully admitted was over. Yet Layla's world was intoxicating and like a moth drawn to flame. He ignored the risk. The more David's desire grew, the more brazen he became about their affair. Eventually, a reckless idea took shape in his mind. He had a beachside villa in Belize that was rarely used. Perhaps a little tropical escape was just what they needed. Sun, sand, and secrecy far from prying eyes. Layla loved the idea, squealing with excitement at the notion of turquoise waters and private cabanas. They decided on a date, making hush-hush travel plans through David's private jet. In David's mind, this was a contained fantasy, a secret paradise sealed away from the rest of his life. No one would ever know. They would be safe to indulge, if only for a few days. He should have remembered that secrets don't stay buried forever. And with social media's insatiable appetite for drama, a single misstep could set off a chain reaction he'd never see coming. The villa in Belize was a pristine haven surrounded by palm trees, with a private stretch of powdery white sand extending into azure waters. It was the kind of place people only see in glossy travel magazines, one David rarely got to enjoy, thanks to his busy schedule. Layla's eyes sparkled when they arrived. She ran to the ocean's edge, letting the warm waves lap at her feet. David watched her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Somewhere in the recesses of his conscience, a small voice asked, "Is this worth it?" He silenced it, enticed by the vision of Layla on the beach. Each morning they lounged under canopied daybeds, sipping tropical cocktails and listening to the rhythmic crash of waves. David felt more alive than he had in years. He indulged in Layla's laughter, her spontaneous dances in the sand, the ways she made him forget about corporate boardrooms and stifling responsibilities. This was freedom, no obligations, no routine, just the two of them enjoying life's simple pleasures. On the second day, after a lazy breakfast of fresh mangoes and coffee, Layla teased David with a challenge. "Let's take a picture, something special to remember this trip by." David hesitated. He had always maintained a strict no social media posts policy when it came to his private affairs. But the sunlight was dancing off the ocean, and Layla looked radiant in her turquoise bikini. She draped herself across a beach lounger, beckoning him closer. David relented, pulling out his phone. He snapped a few pictures of them together. Layla's head on his chest, the glimmering ocean behind them. Laughing, they flipped through the shots, choosing their favorites. Layla posted a couple of photos on her own discreet account set to private. She had only a handful of followers, mostly art world acquaintances, she said. David shrugged, telling himself that a handful of people with no ties to his life wouldn't make a difference. Still, he felt a pang of anxiety at the possibility of any slip. Emboldened by the day's carefree vibe, David grew reckless. Late that evening, after a lavish dinner prepared by the villa's private chef, Layla pressed herself against him and giggled. "Let's show off just a bit. Let's make them jealous." She grabbed his phone and teased him with an Instagram story post. "Just a quick shot of the sunset," she said, with a silhouette of them toasting wine glasses. She promised it wouldn't give away too much. "No faces, no location tags," she whispered. Caught up in the evening's romantic intoxication, David acquiesced. He posted it. The immediate response from his followers was mild. People admired the sunset, the luxurious atmosphere. But within minutes, eagle-eyed fans began to notice small details, the shape of a woman's figure in the reflection of the glass door, the second wine glass in David's hand. A few commented, enjoying a romantic getaway. David, others posted heart emojis and asked, "Where's Sarah?" That was the first red flag. David ignored it, telling himself it was harmless speculation. The next morning, in a haze of euphoria, David made a grave mistake. While Layla was frolicking in the waves, he snapped a candid shot of her, capturing her face in profile, then posted it to his main feed with a cryptic caption, "A moment of peace in paradise." He truly believed it was ambiguous enough that no one would identify her. He never tagged her account, never mentioned her name. But the internet has a way of connecting the dots. Within minutes, the post garnered thousands of likes. Then came the comments, some supportive, many curious, a few, laced with suspicion. A handful of David's close friends texted him directly. "Who is she?" Some used winking emojis, half joking. Others were more direct, worried that this could blow back on him if Sarah saw it. Unperturbed, David turned off his phone notifications, wanting to stay in their bubble of paradise a little while longer. It was on the final day of their trip that reality began to intrude. Unbeknownst to David, a tabloid blogger had recognized Layla's face from a rumor that had circulated in certain high society circles. An art dealer with a dubious past, rumored to seduce wealthy clients, rumored to have left Europe under a cloud of scandal. The blogger had ties to gossip circles across the globe and had access to hush-hush sources in the European art scene. By the time David and Layla boarded his private jet for the return flight to New York, the blogger was already working on an exposé cross-referencing images and combing through digital footprints. The seeds of disaster were planted, and neither David nor Layla had any clue that a social media storm was brewing. They touched down in New York that evening, stepping back into a world that would soon turn on them with alarming speed. For David, the beach vacation was a blissful memory. For the internet, it became the catalyst for a scandal that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his mistress, his marriage, and even himself. When David checked his phone after landing, he noticed a barrage of missed calls and frantic texts, primarily from his closest business associates and his public relations officer, Jacqueline Nguyen. His heart pounded as he glanced at the notifications. Typically, such a flurry of calls indicated a major development, a collapsed deal, maybe a crisis in one of his overseas offices. But as he skimmed through them, he realized the panic was personal, not professional. "David, call me ASAP." One text from Jacqueline read, "We have a problem on Instagram." Confused and apprehensive, he dialed Jacqueline's number. She picked up immediately, her voice strained. "David, you need to delete that post right now," she blurted before he could speak. "Calm down, Jackie." He attempted trying to maintain composure. "What's going on?" She launched into a rapid-fire explanation. "Your post with that woman on the beach." Someone recognized her. Comments are exploding. There's a rumor swirling that she's a con artist who allegedly scammed an art collector in Paris. People are sharing screenshots, old articles, everything. It's going viral. They're calling her the art world grifter. This is beyond just an affair rumor. This could turn into a full-blown scandal. David's head spun. He had braced himself for gossip about a potential mistress, but allegations of criminal activity took the situation to an entirely different level. He ended the call immediately, opened Instagram, and gaped at the flood of comments. Many asked, "Is that Layla St. James?" Others claimed she was wanted for questioning in Europe. Some linked to half-baked investigative pieces from obscure blogs. And then there were the moral judgments, David Harrington. How could you cheat on your wife with a criminal respect lost? Hypocrite. A real philanthropist wouldn't be with a con artist. Layla, who was seated beside him in his chauffeured car, scrolled through her own phone. He could see the color drain from her face. "David, we need to talk," she whispered, voice shaky. Not willing to address the situation in the car, he texted his driver to head to one of his discreet penthouse properties in Manhattan. He couldn't go home to his mansion. Sarah was likely there, and a confrontation now would be disastrous. Layla's expression was that of panic fused with indignation. "I don't understand why they're saying these things," she kept muttering. "I'm not a criminal." She tried to show him what she claimed were legitimate references from her past employers, though David barely glanced at them. Once they arrived at the penthouse, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Layla collapsed onto a plush sofa. David paced phone in hand, reading through messages from colleagues, PR consultants, and even lawyers. His empire was built on a carefully curated image of competence and ethics. Any hint of scandal could harm investor confidence. And the fact that Sarah, widely respected in legal and philanthropic circles, might soon find out, was another ticking bomb. "I need you to tell me everything," David demanded, voice taut with urgency. "Why are people calling you a grifter? Were you accused of something in Europe? Tell me now, Layla." She exhaled, trembling. "I never scammed anyone. I was involved with a wealthy French collector. Yes, but I left because he was controlling and abusive. He spread rumors about me to cover his tracks. I never faced any charges, none of it is true." David studied her, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. He had believed her wholeheartedly until this moment, but now his instincts sounded alarms. Something in her eyes. Was it fear, or was it guilt? The swirling chaos of the moment made it hard to read. A sense of betrayal and dread took hold of him. He realized that even if Layla was innocent, the public didn't care. Gossip and scandal had already latched onto them. The internet feeds on controversy, and they had served it up on a silver platter. The damage might already be done. Over the next few hours, David's crisis management team mobilized. He engaged his top-notch legal counsel, pressing them to craft a statement denying any criminal association. Jacqueline orchestrated a digital damage control strategy, locking down comments, removing the offending post, and issuing official disclaimers that any claims about Layla's criminal background were unsubstantiated rumors. But the internet had already taken screenshots. The post lived on in countless retweets and reshares. Worse still, the mainstream media was picking it up now. A celebrity gossip show ran a segment featuring the blurred-out images of David and Layla on the beach with a dramatic voiceover billionaire, David Harrington's rumored mistress, international con artist, or misunderstood muse. Speculative headlines mushroomed across tabloids, often accompanied by pictures of Sarah, his wronged wife, looking stoic and poised at past charity events. On top of everything, phone calls from Sarah began lighting up David's screen. He couldn't bring himself to answer. His mind whirled in panic, trying to figure out how to spin this. He composed text after text to Sarah, erasing them before sending any. There was no easy way to explain. Perhaps the best he could do was beg for her forgiveness and attempt some sort of damage limitation. David, Layla said softly, breaking the tense silence. I need you to believe me. I'm not who they say I am. He looked at her, swallowing the lump in his throat. We'll figure this out. He managed, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. But the question that truly haunted him was, had he been duped? And if so, was it just by a cunning seductress, or also by his own naive desire for excitement and novelty? The answer wouldn't remain hidden for long. The internet had taken hold of this scandal, and soon even darker revelations would surface, forcing David to confront secrets far more devastating than an affair. While David and Layla tried to contain the inferno in Manhattan, Sarah Harrington was at home, feeling as though the ground had opened beneath her feet. Initially, she had ignored the handful of texts from friends, hinting at David's suspicious Instagram post. She was used to rumors. But then her best friend, Monica Alvarez, sent a message that rattled her. Please check the tabloids. I'm so sorry, Sarah. With shaky hands, Sarah clicked a link Monica had forwarded. She saw David's Instagram post, the silhouette of a woman on a beach, and the avalanche of salacious comments and allegations. Her first reaction was numbness, an eerie calm that spread through her limbs. She had suspected David might be unfaithful, but seeing it unfold publicly was a different kind of pain. An hour later, her phone buzzed again. It was her mother, distressed and confused about the swirling rumors. Embarrassment flooded Sarah, a hot flush crawling up her cheeks. She assured her mother she was fine, even though her heart felt as if it were cracking in half. She forced herself to remain steady, telling her mother not to believe everything she read online. But the numbness soon gave way to anger, then heartbreak, then an odd sense of relief. At least now the rumors were in the open. No more doubts, no more illusions. She spent the next few hours pacing the living room, rereading old messages from David, analyzing their marriage from every angle. She felt a mixture of betrayal and odd detachment, as though she were hovering above herself, watching it all unfold from a distance. A short while later, David's chauffeur arrived at the mansion, dropping off a large black envelope. Sarah took it, opened it, and found legal documents inside, some half-baked statements from David's attorneys, disclaimers about the alleged mistress's background, and an apologetic note that ended with, "Please do not speak to the press. I will explain everything." There was no real apology, no admission of guilt. Just corporate-sounding instructions. It was like receiving a memo from a CEO to a subordinate rather than a heartfelt message from a husband to his wife. Furious, she called David multiple times, but each attempt went to voicemail. She left a single message. "You owe me an explanation. David, I'm not some PR problem to be handled. Then she hung up, refusing to try again. That evening, as she attempted to navigate the swirling confusion, she received another unexpected visitor. Michael Whitmore, her cousin and fellow attorney, who also worked for a prestigious Los Angeles firm. Michael was in New York on business and had seen the online furore. He arrived unannounced, a supportive presence Sarah desperately needed. They sat in the living room, the mansion feeling too large, too grand for the gloom enveloping it. Sarah poured them both glasses of wine, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She recounted the situation, her suspicions, the damning Instagram post, the rumors about the mistress's criminal past. She felt exposed, humiliated. Michael listened patiently, asking pointed questions. "So this woman Layla might be a con artist," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Do we know if it's true?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know anything anymore. I thought I knew David, but now I'm not so sure." Michael offered a thoughtful nod. "Look, Sarah, I can help you. Legally. We can figure out your options, whether it's a separation, a divorce, or simply negotiations for your protection. You shouldn't trust his attorneys. They'll protect him first." Sarah sighed, leaning back into the sofa's cushions. "I appreciate that, but I need time to think. My marriage is on the line, and if this woman really is dangerous, I don't want to rush into any decisions I'll regret." Michael placed his hand over hers. "I understand. But be cautious. Men like David with power and money can become unpredictable under pressure. Do what you must to protect yourself emotionally, legally, financially." That night, Sarah tried to sleep, but nightmares plagued her images of David and Layla on a beach, swirling tabloids and faceless gossipers pointing fingers at her. The next morning, she decided she wouldn't be silent. If David wouldn't provide clarity, she would find it on her own. She scheduled a meeting with her own legal advisors, ignoring the suggestion in David's letter to remain quiet. She reached out to her charitable partners, confirming that she would continue her activism work, regardless of the scandal. The last thing she needed was for her philanthropic efforts to be overshadowed by her husband's affair. Amid the emotional turmoil, a flicker of her old resolve appeared. Sarah refused to let David's betrayal define her. If anything, it fortified her determination. If the woman in the scandal truly was a con artist, Sarah intended to expose the lies. And if the rumors were false, she would force David to explain why he had put her through this mortifying ordeal. From that point on, Sarah began her own quiet investigation. Friends in the art world, acquaintances in legal networks across Europe, she reached out to anyone who might have a lead on Layla St. James. She had no illusions that discovering the truth would fix her marriage, but at least she wouldn't be a passive spectator to her own humiliation. Little did she know her search for answers would set off the next wave of revelations, drawing her into a labyrinth of secrets deeper and more twisted than she could have ever imagined. Back at David's penthouse, tension hung in the air like a stagnant fog. Layla paced the living room, her phone constantly buzzing with text messages and calls. She ignored most, focusing instead on David, who was huddled over his laptop in a makeshift war room arrangement with his PR team via video conference. The official statements they had released weren't silencing the rumors. If anything, the chatter online seemed to grow louder, especially on niche art world forums. Jacqueline's voice crackled through the laptop speakers. "David, we have to address these allegations head-on. We found some references to Layla's possible involvement with a French collector named Jean-Louis Moreau. He's rumored to have lost a significant sum purchasing forgeries from an unknown intermediary, someone described as an attractive American woman. Some people are linking that story to Layla. We need to refute this or confirm it. Refute it. Layla interjected, indignation flaring in her eyes. It's a smear campaign by a bitter ex. I've told David this already. David sighed. Do we have any evidence that you didn't do these things? Layla. Something official. Legal documents proving your innocence. She glowered, crossing her arms. I never faced formal charges. That's all the proof I have. Jacqueline's voice softened. That's not enough for the court of public opinion. They want something concrete. With a heavy sigh, David ended the call, promising to regroup later. He turned to face Layla, who was hugging herself defensively. I need the truth, he said quietly. I'm not accusing you, but if there's any detail you left out, I need to know. Her eyes flickered. Then she told him her story. Layla claimed she had indeed worked with Jean-Louis Moreau, one of France's most influential collectors, who hired her to help him scout and acquire valuable pieces. According to Layla, Jean-Louis was arrogant and manipulative, eventually pressuring her into a toxic affair. As she tried to distance herself professionally and personally, Jean-Louis began to sabotage her reputation, planting rumors of forgery and fraud. Layla insisted she had zero involvement in any wrongdoing and fled Europe after receiving threats from Jean-Louis's associates. She'd been attempting to rebuild her life in New York, severing all ties with that dark chapter. David listened, half wanting to believe her. The story was plausible enough. Rich men had used their influence to destroy someone's reputation before. But a nagging doubt remained. Layla was still omitting details. What about the rumors you drugged him and stole money? David asked, referencing a particularly sensational claim circulating online. Her cheeks reddened. Utter lies. Fabricated. I don't do drugs. I hardly even drink. I've never stolen a cent from anyone in my life. Don't you see, he's punishing me because I left him. David studied her trembling lip, the tears welling in her eyes. He wanted to comfort her, to accept her story at face value. But the stakes were too high. His empire was in jeopardy, and if Layla was hiding something, the fallout could be catastrophic. Yet the thought of losing her, the excitement she brought into his life, filled him with dread. So he decided to proceed cautiously, choosing to believe her for the moment, but resolved to do his own thorough checks. He called in favors from private investigators he had used in corporate deals. Within hours, they began scouring European legal records, court documents, and any traces of Layla's past, all while David prepared for the next wave of media scrutiny. The scandal showed no signs of abating. Then, in a surprising twist, David's phone rang with a call from none other than Jean-Louis Moreau himself. A few months prior, David had made casual acquaintance with Moreau at a Monaco charity event. Now the French collector was reaching out directly, presumably, to discuss the fiasco. With Layla fidgeting nervously nearby, David accepted the call. On speaker, Jean-Louis's accented voice flowed smoothly. Ah, Monsieur Harrington. I see we have a common acquaintance. David cleared his throat. Apparently so. I'd like to get to the bottom of this. You're aware of the rumors. A condescending chuckle crackled over the speaker. Rumors, yes. But they are not rumors, monsieur. The woman you call Layla St. James, if that's her real name, defrauded me. She introduced me to forged artwork, manipulated me emotionally, then disappeared with large commissions. I have evidence. I attempted legal action, but she slipped away. Layla blanched, shaking her head vehemently at David. David pressed. She claims you invented these lies because she ended a personal relationship with you. A harsh laugh erupted from Jean-Louis. Personal relationship? She seduced me for one purpose: to gain access to my network and my finances. I warn you, Harrington, this is a dangerous woman. She is skilled at deception. If you continue to involve yourself with her, your name, your empire, both will burn. The call ended abruptly. Layla broke into tears, insisting Jean-Louis was lying, that he was the manipulator. David stood there, torn. On one hand, he despised Jean-Louis's smug tone and recognized how men of power often rewrite history to blame women. On the other, the man's conviction was chilling. Could it all be true? David's private investigators would soon deliver a preliminary report, but the emotional stakes were skyrocketing. If Layla was innocent, David would stand by her. If she was guilty, he risked his fortune, his reputation, everything. And all the while, Sarah loomed in the background, her silence perhaps more threatening than any media outlet. That night, David slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of forging art and forging love, unable to discern which illusions were real. Little did he know the truth would be more complicated and more shocking than he could ever anticipate. By the following morning, David's investigators had sent a cryptic message. "We have substantial findings. Meeting recommended." He arranged for them to come to the penthouse, carefully scheduling it when Layla would be out. She had departed earlier to clear her head, though David wondered if she was actually meeting someone else. Just after noon, two stoic men in suits arrived, introducing themselves as Morgan Harris and Philip Zhao. David led them into the study, shutting the door behind them. Their expressions were grim. Morgan began. "Mr. Harrington, we've identified two separate legal dockets in Paris and Brussels that involve an American woman with a similar profile to Ms. St. James. The name used was not Layla St. James, but Linda McPherson." Same initials, L.M. Philip continued. The charges were dropped in one case and settled out of court in another. Both involved allegations of art fraud and misrepresentation. The documents list an unidentified male accomplice. David leaned forward, his pulse pounding. "Are we sure this is the same woman?" Morgan nodded. "We have a 78% facial recognition match between photos from archived news articles and the images you provided us of Ms. St. James. A strong likelihood it's her." A nauseating dread coursed through David's veins. "Any sign of Jean-Louis Moreau's involvement?" Philip replied. "He's mentioned in the Brussels docket as a complaining witness. The details were sealed, but we suspect a settlement was reached behind closed doors." David sank into his chair, his mind a kaleidoscope of betrayal and rage. He thought of confronting Layla, but a text on his phone interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Unknown number. "If you want to keep certain secrets from your wife and the public, it'll cost you $5 million. Wire instructions to follow." Accompanying the text was a single photograph, a candid shot of David and Layla in an intimate moment on the Belize beach, far more revealing than anything posted on social media. Clearly, someone had been photographing them. The angle suggested a drone or a long-range camera. And now they wanted money. David clenched his jaw. "I'm being blackmailed," he growled, showing Morgan and Philip the text. They exchanged worried looks, cautioning David not to make any hasty moves. This could be linked to Ms. St. James's alleged accomplice, Morgan offered. "We've seen this pattern before." Seething, David dismissed them. He needed a plan. A quiet hush money payment would only encourage more extortion down the line. Yet ignoring the threat could lead to even greater exposure. And the worst part was the growing suspicion that Layla herself might be part of this scheme, another elaborate con. But a flicker of doubt lingered. Perhaps Layla truly was a victim, and her old accomplice was extorting them both. He decided he needed to corner Layla that very evening. No more half-truths or evasion. He wanted her entire story. If she lied or faltered, he'd cut her off and let the legal system do its worst. But if she persuaded him of her innocence, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could face this together. Hours later, Layla returned. David wasted no time. "We need to talk," he said curtly, leading her into the study. She looked apprehensive, eyes darting to the closed door. He showed her the blackmail text and the incriminating photo. He then presented the investigative report, the name Linda McPherson, the out-of-court settlements. With every piece of information, Layla's face paled further. When he finished, an uneasy silence settled. Layla's lips quivered. Then she began to speak, voice trembling. "I'm not Linda McPherson. That was my sister." A new tale spilled forth, each revelation more shocking than the last. Layla insisted she had a twin sister raised separately after a messy divorce in her childhood. The sister was the one who got entangled with Jean-Louis, forging art and leveraging Layla's identity. Layla claimed she tried to help her sister out of the mess, but it spiraled beyond control. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I fled to America to escape that chaos. My sister threatened to drag me down with her. I changed my name legally to distance myself from her record. David, I swear I've never defrauded anyone. I thought you'd never understand, so I kept it hidden." David's mind reeled. The idea of a twin, a doppelganger who could have orchestrated these crimes, sounded outrageous, but not impossible. Layla sobbed, claiming her sister was the blackmailer, the one who had been snapping secret photos and demanding money. "She's punishing me for leaving her behind, for not bailing her out again." The story was so elaborate, so twisted. David's gut wrenched with conflicting emotions. The puzzle pieces fit a little too well, yet Layla's tears seemed genuine. He remembered how she had always been vague about her family, how frightened she seemed whenever he asked about her past. Could this all be real? Wrestling with his doubts, David found himself making a decision based on a precarious blend of logic and emotion. "If what you're saying is true, we need proof," he said, voice stern. "We'll involve my investigators. We'll find your sister, and we'll end this blackmail." Layla nodded, relieved. "Whatever it takes. I'll do anything." A fragile truce formed between them that night. David, driven by a potent mix of fear, pride, and infatuation, chose to believe Layla at least temporarily. He vowed to protect her from the blackmailer, from the swirling rumors, from everything. Yet in the darkness of the penthouse, as Layla slept fitfully in the next room, David stared out the window at the glowing city lights, wondering if he'd just made the greatest mistake of his life. While David grappled with the twin sister revelation, Sarah conducted her own inquiry, determined to uncover the truth about Layla St. James. Through her legal network, she managed to contact a renowned French attorney named René Fournier, who had once handled a high-profile art fraud case involving Jean-Louis Moreau. Via a series of lengthy email exchanges, Sarah pieced together a confounding puzzle. According to René, there had indeed been an American woman at the center of the Moreau scandal. Someone who used multiple aliases, among them Linda and Layla. Official documents were sealed, but rumors suggested the woman had an accomplice, possibly a family member. René also hinted that the entire fiasco nearly extended into a broader European crime syndicate. But before any formal charges could stick, the woman vanished. Moreau had enough influence to keep the scandal out of mainstream news, presumably to save face. But the rumor mill churned relentlessly behind closed doors. Sarah's instincts told her that David's mistress had some connection to that case, but she wanted concrete proof. She scrolled through obscure websites, reading half-legible Google translations of French tabloids looking for any mention of sisters or twins. Then she stumbled on a small blog post from years ago that mentioned a sibling duo suspected of art forgery, one rumored to be involved with Moreau. The post cited no official documents, but the narrative was eerily similar to Layla's story. Frustrated, yet fueled by this partial validation, Sarah pressed further. She reached out to an old law school acquaintance in Brussels, who was now a mid-level judicial clerk. Within a day, the acquaintance confirmed that sealed records existed involving a Linda Macpherson, but he couldn't access details without risking his career. He did, however, confirm the mention of a sister in the sealed complaint. Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Layla might indeed have a twin, a partner in crime, or a separate individual entirely. Either possibility spelled trouble for David, and by extension, Sarah. If Layla had roped David into a blackmail scheme, the scandal could destroy his reputation and the philanthropic work Sarah herself cherished. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in an even more unexpected way. Late one afternoon, Sarah received a cryptic text from a number labeled Unknown. Meet me at the Green Leaf Cafe on 5th. I have information about Layla. Come alone. A friend. Wary of a trap. Sarah nearly ignored it, but curiosity and a desire to protect herself compelled her to go. She arrived at the cafe, a cozy, dimly lit space, scanning the patrons nervously. A tall, lean man in a baseball cap stood and waved her over. As she approached, he took off the cap, revealing salt and pepper hair. She recognized him vaguely from a magazine cover, Jean-Louis Moreau. Her heart hammered as she sat down, unsure how to proceed. Moreau spoke first, his English tinged with a delicate accent. Mrs. Harrington, thank you for coming. I apologize for the clandestine approach, but we share a common predicament. She regarded him with cold caution. You claim to have information about Layla St. James. His lips curled into a faint smile. Or Linda Macpherson, or whatever she calls herself these days. Sarah's breath caught. So it's true. Moreau leaned in. I contacted your husband, but he seems enamored by her. Or perhaps she's convinced him of a sob story. Either way, he is not receptive. But you, Mrs. Harrington, you have more at stake if this escalates further. He slid an envelope across the table. Sarah opened it to find printed emails, photographs, documents linking Layla to a series of art deals with suspicious authenticity. One photo showed a woman identical to Layla holding hands with a second woman, a near doppelganger. Another picture captured them in front of a Belgian art gallery, rumored to deal in forgeries. The timestamps suggested these were from a few years ago. Proof of her partnership with her twin, who is equally cunning. Moreau explained. They swindled me and they swindled others. I want them both to face justice. But your husband is in the way, blindly protecting her. Sarah felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, bitterness, heartbreak, and a strange sense of vindication. Part of her wanted to lash out at David. Part of her wanted to pity him. She also wondered what Moreau expected from her. Moreau eyed her. I need your help. Influence your husband to break ties with her. If he continues to shield her, she will only drag him further into the mud. And I suspect her sister lurks in the shadows, planning something bigger. Perhaps the blackmail we are hearing about Sarah swallowed hard. What do you get out of this? His brow furrowed. Closure, justice, and the chance to salvage what's left of my reputation in Europe. Also a certain moral satisfaction in knowing these sisters don't dupe anyone else. They parted ways with a tense handshake. Sarah clutched the envelope as if it were a time bomb. Her marriage had been on the brink of collapse, but this new knowledge gave her a sense of responsibility. She had to warn David, if only to protect him from sinking deeper into a catastrophic scandal. She also felt a measure of compassion. Despite his betrayal, David was still the man she once loved, and no matter how furious she felt, she didn't want him ruined by these manipulations. That night she found herself driving to David's penthouse, not entirely sure how she would approach the subject. The envelope of evidence sat on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. She thought of all the ways this meeting could go. Would David believe her? Would Layla be there, spitting venom at Sarah's intrusion? One thing was certain: the next steps she took could determine the fate of both their futures and possibly save David from the greatest betrayal of his life. Sarah arrived at David's penthouse just after dusk, her nerves taut with urgency. The doorman let her in, without question. As she stepped off the private elevator, she found David pacing the living room phone clutched in hand. He froze when he saw her guilt, relief, and dread flashing across his face. "Sarah," he began. She raised a hand. "I know everything. I'm here to stop you from making a terrible mistake." Without another word, she extended the envelope Jean-Louis Moreau had given her. David took it, flipped through its contents, photographs of Layla and her twin emails, detailing suspicious art deals and banking documents that hinted at blackmail. His face tightened with disbelief. "Where did this come from?" he asked quietly. "From Moreau," Sarah said. "He claims Layla and her sister ran a sophisticated art scam, and now she's entangled you in it." David looked stunned. "Layla told me her sister set her up, that she's the victim here. She also told you she'd be honest with investigators," Sarah countered. "Did she ever show you this?" She pointed to a photo of Layla and her sister, exchanging a thick envelope, both smiling. Before David could reply, Layla stepped out of a side room. Her hair was tousled, her eyes burning. "You're working with that man, Sarah. That manipulative monster." Sarah didn't flinch. "You've been hiding too much. If you're innocent, prove it. I was trying to protect David." Layla cried. "My sister threatened us both. I didn't plan to fall in love, but I did." Everything changed. Before David could react, Layla's phone buzzed. She paled, then bolted toward her bag. Her belongings spilled across the floor, lipstick's wallet and a folded note. Sarah snatched it up. "Swiss wire transfer instructions," she read aloud. "Is this your sister's next payment?" Layla's defenses crumbled. "I was going to handle it. I didn't want David dragged through this." "So you'd rather pay hush money than tell the truth?" Sarah's voice was tight with disgust. David stared at Layla, torn between fury and heartbreak. "You told me we were into this together, but you lied again. I had to." Layla shouted, tears streaming. "I knew if you doubted me, you'd walk away." David's face hardened. "And now I just might." The room fell into tense silence. Then quietly, David picked up his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, dialing. "Let them figure out who's lying." Layla lunged for the phone, but Sarah stepped in her way. A moment later, the call connected. The decision was made. Sirens approached in the distance. Layla collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Sarah turned away, fighting back tears of her own, of betrayal, loss, and something like pity. The truth would unravel in the days to come. Investigators would trace the blackmail, expose the twins' identity, and sort through Layla's involvement. David's public image would take a hit, but it would survive. Whether his marriage did only time would tell. But for now, the storm outside mirrored the one within, and none of their lives would ever be the same. Betrayal, scandal, and secret identities. This story proves that even the most powerful among us can be undone by hidden truths. In the end, David Harrington learned the hard way that wealth and influence can't shield you from the consequences of deception. Sarah, despite her heartbreak, found renewed strength in confronting the lies head-on rather than remaining a silent victim. As for Layla or Linda, her fate was sealed by the very illusions she spun, reminding us that the truth always finds a way to surface.